Is a recession imminent in the United States? Well, with inflation on the rise, slowing economic expansion, and plummeting stock prices, it all points to the affirmative. Many companies typically lay off millions of workers in reaction to decreasing demand, making unemployment spike significantly whenever the economy contracts, no matter how slight. That would be a blow to Biden, who has used employment growth to support his claim that the economy is doing well despite persistently high inflation for decades. Well, the instruments available to President Joe Biden allow him to combat inflation without causing too much harm to the economy. Can he, though? Well, we'll see. Welcome back to Econify, everybody. If you're new to this channel, like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon right there. And fasten your seatbelts and let me take you on a ride as we talk about the economic and financial ideas US President Joe Biden could have to stay out of recession. So I'm sure you'll love it, and you can thank me later, no worries. So let's fly. The President of the United States has repeatedly shot down fears that the Federal Reserve's interest rate increases to combat excessive inflation will cause a recession in the United States. Well, you might say it's probably standard practice for American presidents to speak positively about the economy in order to boost public confidence and prevent political ramifications from a recession. That's not stopping it though, as recession predictions, however, have increased as the FED has felt forced to raise interest rates further in an effort to rein in inflation that has both been more severe and more chronic than anticipated. And as the outlook for the world's largest economy worsens, President Biden has expressed concern. During its massive annual meetings, the International Monetary Fund issued a study predicting that the worst is yet to come for the global economy and lowered its growth forecasts as a result of the war in Ukraine, China's slowdown, and the effects of increasing interest rates around the world. The president has now recently stated that the US economy is chugging along over the holiday season, but the strength of jobs data back in October demonstrated that rising inflation continues to pose a threat of a recession. For one thing, he signed an emergency bill to avoid a rail strike that he said would have resulted in 765,000 job losses in 2 weeks and pushed the country into a terrible downturn. Still, a lot of voters and experts continue to worry that a recession is imminent and that cutting high prices will require laying off workers. And well, we saw that in Twitter, Facebook, Netflix, and a lot of others. And as evidence that his measures were working, Biden cited November's gain of 263,000 jobs and the stability of the unemployment rate at 3.7. He claimed that the freight rail strike posed the greatest threat to the economy, but the country was able to sidestep this crisis by having Congress impose a deal that increased wages without also granting workers the additional paid sick leave they had requested. Wage growth, however, may be part of the problem, as suggested by recent employment data, and inflation can sometimes be a game of whack-a-mole. To put it simply, inflation under Biden's watch has been elusive. When the economy began to recover in 2021 after the pandemic had ravaged the country, supply chains and shortages caused prices to skyrocket, and with Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February, both oil and food prices skyrocketed. If the Federal Reserve wants to curb inflation, it may have to keep interest rates at historically high levels for a long time, and potential harm to the economy in the form of job losses and reduced activity is highly possible. To put it another way, because of how rooted inflation is, the Federal Reserve can't really afford to be looking forward and quickly switch to rate cuts. Inflation rates must fall before any increase in interest rates can be considered. Joe Biden can keep the economy going and stave off a recession with the help of a number of different policies. Preventing a recession will require both immediate measures to boost economic development and more long-term efforts to address fundamental economic problems and promote sustainable growth. If President Biden takes these steps, the economy will remain strong and a recession can be avoided. So let's analyze what he could do to get there. It may also be the case that productivity has decreased. Indeed, if an economy adds maybe millions of additional workers while creating less production, it must definitely suggest that output per worker is dropping, and experts think that productivity growth may have decreased as much as 6% annualized thus far in 2022. which would considerably exceed historical productivity decreases. Now, raising consumer spending is one strategy for doing just that, and if Biden wants to veer off recession, he could achieve this through tax cuts and increased government spending on infrastructure projects, both of which encourage consumer spending. The creation of jobs and expansion of business opportunities are hallmarks of a healthy economy. By helping small businesses expand and hiring people in high-growth sectors like renewable energy and technology, he could also work to increase employment. For instance, Biden pushed for the passage of the climate, healthcare, and tax plan he signed in August, which includes investments in sustainable energy. He stated that under his plan, annual utility costs for a typical household would drop by $500. He also plans to make housing more affordable by building more than 1 million units, and by the end of the month, the Treasury Department will release new regulations that will make it simpler to use the low-income housing tax credit to construct mixed-income housing. Biden intends to combat inflation and probably the coming recession, as everyone has predicted, by reducing the government deficit, which the climate bill will do by $238 billion over the course of a decade, or at least that's what the CBO thinks. And reducing the deficit, whether by increasing taxes or decreasing government spending, is disinflationary because it removes money from the economy. Yet some maintain that even if the program is sound, it won't significantly impact inflation rates. And after signing the climate bill, President Biden moved to cancel up to $10,000 in student loan debt per borrower, injecting more money into the economy, which has led many, including former Obama White House Council of Economic Advisors Chairman Jason Furman, to argue that this action undermines the effectiveness of the bill's deficit reduction provisions. There are a lot of economic warning indicators on both sides of the Atlantic, and at least everyone is aware, plus the US stock market fell sharply from its peak on January 3rd, and recession fears are rising or rose across Europe and the United States as a result of the Federal Reserve's and the European Central Bank's aggressive rate hikes to combat inflation. Meanwhile, the Russian war against Ukraine, with China's tacit support, has highlighted the significance of the transatlantic union as a democratic bulwark against cruel autocracies and as a pillar of stability in the world. Policymakers have largely turned to traditional monetary policy by raising interest rates and risking recession, in an effort to combat rapidly rising prices caused by a combination of supply chain bottlenecks leading to a shortage of certain goods, rising energy prices, and increased consumer demand. The revival and completion of an EU-US free trade agreement, building on the Obama administration's efforts to establish the TTIP, that's the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership if you don't know what I mean. And that happens to be an option that a lot of policymakers in the United States and the European Union may eventually consider as a means of solving multiple issues at once. Because by boosting economic growth on both sides of the Atlantic, a TTIP successor would lessen the likelihood of a protracted recession in the United States and the European Union. A TTIP would be the largest trade deal ever, eliminating 98 to 100% of tariffs and reducing non-tariff barriers to trade with Europe by 10 to 25%. US exports would skyrocket, wages for high and low-skilled employees would rise, and millions of new jobs would be created in the United States. In addition to stimulating general economic growth, the agreement is estimated to increase the annual US GDP by 0.04% or by $75 billion. One TTIP would add 0.3 to 0.5% to the EU's GDP, or around $64 billion per year. And I'd say that's pretty much enough to stay out of recession. But what do you think? The Federal Reserve will face a difficult balancing act as it attempts to raise interest rates and unwind its balance sheet to stifle inflation without bringing the economy to a grinding halt. And threading this needle might just be a massive pain in the ass. Well, to relieve some of the burden on the Federal Reserve, the Biden administration and Congress can use less harmful anti-inflationary tools. For instance, a 2% reduction in tariffs is estimated by the Peterson Institute for International Economics to reduce inflation by 1.3% and save families $800. Moreover, the White House can reduce inflation by dropping its advocacy for expanding Buy America rules, Davis-Bacon rules mandating above-market wages, ethanol blends in gasoline, and environmental restrictions on constructing infrastructure. And perhaps most importantly, the White House should ease regulations on the exploration of oil, coal, and natural gas, and scrap its proposed tax and spending bonanza, and you'll probably know that as Build Back Better. These measures would reduce inflation, easing the Federal Reserve's need to keep interest rates low. With inflation getting a lot more elevated, the contrasting GDP growth and job numbers imply a pretty bleak economy that might fall either way. Congress and the Biden administration must use their weapons wisely and not merely wait on the Federal Reserve to crush the economy's brake pedal. And that is all for this video, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe to Econify and tell us what you think in the comments below. We hope to see you in the next video, and as always, thanks for watching.